we need to talk about chocolate. This time, Marie Antoinette, chocolate, and its trigger for the French Revolution. We need to answer the question, did chocolate help trigger the French Revolution, just as tea triggered the American Revolution? Chocolate and tea are both expensive commodities, commodities that triggered revolutions, revolutions that changed the world. You can't be serious. Chocolate causing a revolution? Let me give you 3 good reasons why chocolate fueled the age of revolution. Firstly, it becomes a symbol of oppression. Dark chocolate equaled decadence. Chocolate became to symbolize the inequality between rich and poor. Think about it, if aristocrats drink chocolate but don't pay taxes, that's going to be an explosive mix, particularly when the poor couldn't even afford bread or were starving. Secondly, we have this new introduction of coffee shops and chocolate houses. And just as the coffee houses in America were the epicenter of revolution for the American War of Independence, so they were epicenters of dissent in France. And we have typically sort of young lawyers stimulated by chocolate, stimulated by coffee, gossiping, fake news, conspiracy, writing poisonous pamphlets. And you can see how chocolate stewed, brewed, and stirred a revolution. And finally, you have Marie Antoinette herself and her extravagance and her personality. Never in the field of human history has so much fun been had by so few at the expense of so many. And of course, the most famous drinker of chocolate in France was Marie Antoinette. And she was notorious for her sweet tooth and her extravagant consumption of chocolate, which at the time was a very, very expensive delicacy. So this was the age of excess, the age of outrageous extravagance. And unfortunately, this trope and her personality fermented into a noxious substance. And she became known as Madame Deficit, bankrupting France. But let's jump right in and get on with the story. And the first element of the story of why chocolate caused a revolution is chocolate became the symbol of oppression. Aristocrats drank chocolate, but they didn't pay tax. So let's set the context and just give you a little bit of an understanding of the feeling at the time, and then we're going to dive in. And one of the problems of telling a story as big as the French Revolution and chocolate is, how do I know? Was I there at the time? No, I wasn't. But guess who was? Napoleon. And he said, the Marriage of Figaro is the revolution already in action. And this is a play by Pierre Beaumarchais. What he meant was essentially the aristocracy at Versailles was like a chicken whose head had been cut off. It may run around in a lively way, but it is in fact already dead. Napoleon believed that the play and its critique of aristocracy was basically showing that it was exercising unjust power and it was mediocrity being outwitted by his servants. And let's just dig in a little bit into the play and understand what we're exactly talking about. So the play is about a Spanish count, and there is an alliteration that I won't go into, which is obvious, and his right of the droit de seigneur. And this is his right to sleep with a maid on her wedding night. Obviously, it is seen as a parody of social inequality and an abuse of power, that the count would sleep with his servant on her most precious night, the night that she marries her husband. And you can see the toxicity of that. And that was a play that was playing, was very popular at the time and was seen as basically the revolution in action. Now, Mozart was aware of this conflict, and his libretto that wrote that play, The Marriage of Figaro, also wrote Così fan tutti, the opera. And we have a wonderful scene in Così fan tutti, Desipina And the libretto goes like this. She is whipping the chocolate. I'm now quoting, "Who is whipping the chocolate? What a wretched life a lady's maid leads, from morning till night working, sweating and toiling, and after all one's done there's nothing for oneself. I've been beating this for half an hour, and now the chocolate's ready, yet though my tongue is hanging out, must I just stand and smell it? Aren't my tastes just like yours? Oh, dearest ladies, you have the substance, and I only have the smell. Damn it, I'm going to try it." And she tastes it. Delicious. She wipes her mouth. Someone's coming. And that is the scene from Mozart's Così fan tutte. And you can immediately see that chocolate is seen as the tension between the rich and the poor. And the poor at this point are saying, why don't I deserve to eat chocolate as well? Whenever you talk about Marie Antoinette, you have to deal up front with the "let 'em eat cake" comment. And a lie can travel halfway around the world before the truth catches up. And the lie is that she never said it. It came from Rousseau when she was still a child, maybe 14 years old. And this is where most historians stop and leave it and say, okay, she never said that. But this is missing the point. The point is that this was an entirely believable lie. The lie has stuck to her both at the time and across the centuries, because it was true in reality. Perceptions matter. When you're a leader of 27 million people, they're not going to meet you personally, so they have to rely on perceptions. That is why the lie became so toxic. Now, it's difficult to understand the level of rage until you throw your mind back to that Met Ball, and we had an actress,
"Let them eat cake,"
saying "let them eat cake," with extravagant food and ticket prices to the Met Ball of $75,000, which could have fed, up to 10,000 healthy children for a year if you take all the cost for the ball. And there were rage about the wealth inequality, discussed as the Hunger Games or a Ponzi scheme where rich arseholes dress up like peacocks. And this was gilded glamour at a time of war, and it became toxic. Now that's exactly the kind of emotion and reaction we're talking about with Marie Antoinette, built up in Versailles. The rich had hot cocoa every morning, delivered by a waiter while they're lying in their silk sheets. That's always going to be explosive. And in the case of Marie Antoinette, it would be a maid rushing in with a porcelain cup as the queen stretches luxuriously in her silk sheets. No thoughts of bread would cross her mind, only the pleasures of cocoa and sugar. Now, we look at Marie Antoinette as like Rose flying on the prow of the Titanic. And our argument is that the Sun King, Louis XIV, was the creator of this Titanic. And you think that Louis XIV was the one that built that ship, but he didn't provide safety boats, he didn't provide watertight compartments, and he built the Titanic entirely on hubris. We feel that Marie Antoinette was really a victim or collateral damage from the creation of this Titanic in the French Revolution and the violence that was embedded from the outset. And that rage resulted in her death, her husband's death, her child's death. And for a society to create such vengeance and unleash such fury, we need to explain that. We need to explain why it became so toxic. Of course, we've got the victim, Marie Antoinette, and her family. We have the murder weapon, the guillotine. We have the murderer, in our view, Louis XIV, the Sun King. He built that bonfire of vanities that was called Versailles. And it was their singular pursuit of pleasure, including extravagant chocolate dishes, that set France on this course for disaster. For absolute power corrupts absolutely. While they created this destruction, they also, and to give credit to them, they created a cultural superpower of fashion, food, and frivolity. Chocolate was also a well-known aphrodisiac. They used it to excite their lovers and the King of France. The Marquis de Sade wrote of this, and he wrote that there was a party where 10 aristocrats had a chocolate orgy. And this was believed by the people. This is easy to imagine. We're beginning to get this dangerous mix of chocolate, sex, and aristocrats, and we're beginning to stir that pot. And this singular pursuit of passion was so extreme that it still resonates to this day in our language. Now, we have the French kiss, a sensuous and deep kiss. We have the French letter, a slang term for a condom. We have the stereotypical outfit of a French maid. So all these languages in English come from the hijinks in the court. And all this hedonism ends up in them all losing their heads. And Versailles was the epicenter of this. It was detached from Paris, and Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette probably only left Versailles maybe a couple of times, and even that was to go to Paris and go to the salons, the aristocratic salons. So they lived in a bubble. We have the chocolate houses and the coffee houses and the public sphere that basically meant that poetry became the lifeblood of the rebellion and the revolution. And we had roughly 1,600 coffee shops and chocolate shops in Paris. And these were not like the coffee shops that we know. These were sort of penny universities where you had newspapers and periodicals, and you could write poisonous pamphlets and discuss with your young, often lawyers, how unfair it was that the aristocrats didn't pay any tax, and this was a perfect place to foment a revolution. What we have is essentially the pamphlets were the social media of the time, and you could make vicious and anonymous comments about Marie Antoinette and her chocolate. This was, just a perfect hotbed for fake news. Other kings, such as Charles II, had tried to ban coffee shops. He'd infiltrate them with his spies because he saw them as the original source of fake news. So what we want to do is go into these coffee shops and chocolate houses and listen to what they were talking about and read their pamphlets, and we're going to get a sense of how the caffeine and the theobromine stimulated the discussion and made people super angry. And so the pamphlets went like this. While the people starve, the queen sips her rich chocolate in the halls of Versailles, attended by her chocolatiers, blind to the suffering of the nation. Or it might be, while the kingdom starves, Her Majesty wakes to chocolate and creams, her personal chefs ever at their ready, crafting exotic pleasures. Or Her Majesty's table is never without its cups of cocoa and rich delicacies while Paris starves. How many families could be fed on what she spends for a single cup? And you can see the link with the Met, the same sort of outrage of that Met Ball. So the coffee shop that's most associated with the revolution is the Café Procope, which was a Jacobean hub. And this is where all the ideas of liberty, equality, and fraternity were discussed. And this is where Robespierre, Danton, Marat, all drank and got stimulated by the caffeine. You can get the idea that these coffee shops and chocolate shops where these young lawyers started talking and how quickly her chocolate consumption got associated with the poverty and the starvation of the rest of the population. So while you're in your Parisian coffee shop, you're drinking your chocolate and your coffee, and you're talking about the state's finances, and you're talking about Marie Antoinette's frivolous spending, and you're going, while the treasury empties, she feasts on the finest cocoa, a foreign indulgence for a foreign queen. And this is super important. The foreign element becomes a real conspiracy for the simple reason that they know, and they're right in their assumption, that the king and queen will bring in foreign troops. In the case of Marie Antoinette, it's going to be Austrian troops, and they will fight them on the streets with foreign armies. All these discussions at Versailles, chocolate flows as freely as wine, and the queen indulges in foreign pleasures while the people queue for bread. These are all the sentiments, and the danger of the foreignness of chocolate, the foreignness of Marie Antoinette, all get mixed up. So I'm going to wrap up, and this is a quote from Marie Antoinette herself. "I was a queen, and you took away my crown. A wife, and you killed my husband. A mother, and you deprived me of my children. My blood alone remains. Take it, but do not make me suffer long." And I think you can see how chocolate became this potent mix that highlighted, accentuated her foreignness, her extravagance, and helped foment the French Revolution.